we saw that creating the Zombear enemy from the Zombunny was actually very simple. Creating the zombie duck is not much harder, though it does require a few more steps. Mostly the steps are required because the zombie duck is built slightly differently and thus needs different animations. It's also a little bit bigger, so it's worth changing some of the properties on the scripts to make it feel like a more unique enemy. To create the zombie duck, we're going to do something slightly different. I'm going to start by going to the Models folder and the Characters subfolder. I'm going to locate the zombie duck, and I'm going to click and drag that into my scene. Then, instead of trying to parent the zombie duck to the Zombear and figuring out how we're going to switch things around, I'm going to send them both to the origin. I'm going to do that by right-clicking on the transform component of the zombie duck and selecting Reset. I'm going to do the same for the Zombear. Now, I can see them both lined up at the origin. I can also see the players there, so I'm going to go ahead and select the boy game object and disable it by clicking the checkbox in the upper left-hand corner. I'm going to expand Zombear and Zombie Duck. I'll notice that Zombie Duck has two child game objects that handle the graphics, while Zombear and Zombunny only had one. I'm going to start by removing the Zombear graphics. I'm going to select the Zombear game object that's a child of the Zombear parent object, and I'm going to delete it. I am okay breaking the prefab instance. For the Zombie Duck, I'm going to highlight the Hips and ZomDuck game object children. I'm then going to click and drag them both over to the Zombear game object. Again, we are okay breaking the prefab instance. I can now click on this Zombie Duck parent object that's left over in the scene and delete it. At this point, we have a Zombie Duck enemy in the scene, so let's go ahead and change the name from Zombear to Zombie Duck. A few things will need to be tweaked with the scripts and animations of this enemy. Let's start by going to the enemy attack script. The zombie duck should attack a little bit slower but hit a little bit harder. So I'm going to change the time between attacks to 1 and the attack damage to 20. In the enemy health script, we want the zombie duck to have more health and be worth more points. So I'm going to change the max health to 120 and the score value to 20 points. The last thing we need to change is the animator. Let's start by changing the avatar. Right now it's set to the Zombear avatar, so I'm going to click the circle selector to the right of the Zombear avatar, and I'm going to choose the Zombie Duck avatar. Now, since unlike the Zombear, the Zombie Duck does not use the same rig as the Zombunny, we need all new animations. To do this, I'm going to go to the Animations folder. I could create a new animator controller, but that would require me to duplicate all of the states, transitions, and parameters, and that's really unnecessary. Instead, I'm going to create something called an animator override controller. I'm going to create this by right-clicking in the project window and going to Create Animator Override Controller. I'm going to name this Zombie Duck Animator Controller. I know it's a really long name, but it's descriptive, and that's what's important. Now, with the Zombie Duck Animator Controller selected, in the inspector we can see a property for a controller. That's the controller that this animator override is going to override. So I'm going to click and drag the enemy animator controller onto that property. I'll now see all of the animations on that controller listed out for me. If I click on the animations, I will see that these are the animations of the Zombunny. These are the ones I want to change. I'm going to condense down the Zombunny and instead expand the Zombie Duck by clicking the arrow to the right of its image. I'm then going to click and drag its Move, Idle, and Death animations onto the Move, Idle, and Death properties of the Animator Override controller. Once done, I can see that all of the animations point to the Zombie Duck version of those animations. Now that I've created the Animator Override controller, I need to actually apply it. I'm going to click back on the Zombie Duck and notice that it still says Enemy Animator Controller. I'm going to click and drag my new Zombie Duck Animator Controller into that property. Now it's time to turn my Zombie Duck into a prefab. I'm going to click on my Prefabs folder, subfolder Characters, and I'm going to click and drag the zombie duck from the hierarchy into the project window. Now to test this zombie duck out, I'm going to go ahead and move it out of the way because we'll remember it's still standing on the player. And I'm going to click on the Boy Game object and re-enable it by clicking on the checkbox in the upper left-hand corner. Now let's go ahead and hit play. We'll notice the zombie duck looks very frightening. In fact, it looks more frightening than it normally should. There's a bit of an error with how we've applied the animator. This is an issue that can arise with the animator not noticing that the zombie duck avatar has been changed. Luckily, the solution is actually quite simple. You could remove the animator component and then reapply it and add it to all of your scripts. However, that's quite a few steps and you might miss one of the scripts and get an error later. Instead, what I'm going to do is simply right-click on the animator component and select Reset. Now, when I press play, I will see that the zombie duck has been fixed and is now walking and animating correctly. As stated before, this is an issue that can arise with the animator. You'll need to keep this fix in mind, namely right-clicking the animator component and choosing Reset, in the next section where you're going to be creating the other two enemies.